I'm going to be reading the short story called Rip Van Winkle by Washington Irving. This is found on page 115 in your Moss book. Whoever has made a voyage up the Hudson must remember the Catskill Mountains. They are a branch of great Appalachian family and are seen away to the west of the river, swelling up to a noble height and lording it over the surrounding country. Every change of season, every change of weather, indeed every hour of the day produces some change in the magical hues and shapes of these mountains, and they are regarded by all the good wise far and near as perfect barometers. When the weather is fair and settled, they are clothed in blue and purple, and print their bold outlines on the clear evening sky. But sometimes, when the rest of the landscape is cloudless, they will gather a hood of gray vapors about their summit, which, in the last rays of the setting sun, will glow and light up like a crown of glory. At the foot of these fairy mountains, the voyager may have seen the light, smoke curling up from a village, whose shingle roofs gleam among the trees, just where the blue tints of the upland melt away into the fresh green of the nearer landscape. It is a little village of great antiquity, having been founded by some of the Dutch colonists in the early times of the province. There were some of the house, there were some of the house of the original settlers standing within a few years, built of the small yellow bricks brought from world easy. Eat white bread or brown, whichever can be got with least thought or trouble, and would rather starve on a penny than work for a pound. Oh, I skipped a page. Sorry, let's go back one. There were some of the houses of the original settlers standing within a few years, built of small yellow bricks brought from. There we are. Holland, having latticed windows and gable fronts surmounted with weathercocks. In that same village, and in one of these very houses, which was sadly time worn and weather beaten, there lived many years since, while the country was yet a province of Great Britain, a simple, good natured fellow of the name of Rip Van Winkle. So this all set the scene, right? This was a setting description. Here we have a very simple picture of what they're talking about, but this is trying to give us a sense right now of where we are when the story begins. And we are in the Appalachian Mountains, near these very beautiful looking, splendid mountains that have very beautiful colors in the right weather. And it's housed, and we're in a village now at the base of these mountains that is primarily Dutch colonists. That means people from Holland have come over to North America. And this is while Britain is still in control of USA. Okay, so this gives us a sense where we are. In that same village, in one of these very houses, which was sadly time worn and weather beaten, there lived many years since, while the country is yet a province of Great Britain, a simple, good natured fellow of the name of Rip Van Winkle. He was a descendant of the Van Winkles, who figured so gallantly in the chivalrous days of Peter Stuyvesant. I don't know who that is. Um, he inherited, however, but little of the martial character of his ancestors. He was a governor. This guy, Steve Stuyvesant. I have observed that he was a simple, good natured man. He was, moreover, a kind of neighbor, an obedient, henpecked husband. Indeed, to the latter circumstance might be owing the meekness of spirit which gained him such universal popularity. For those men are most apt to be conciliating abroad who are under the disciplines of shrews at home. Their tempers doubtless are rendered pliant in the fiery furnace of domestic trouble, which is worth all the sermons of the world for teaching the virtues of patience and long suffering. So this is saying this man has a wife who is maybe a little bit stronger than him in the sense of spirit, and he has sort of taken more of a passive role in their relationship. It sounds like, um, and this next line actually tells us this exactly. A quarrelsome wife may therefore, in some respects, be considered a tolerable blessing, and if so, Rip Van Winkle was thrice blessed. So it's a little bit of an older style. Obviously, it's not exactly how we approach life nowadays, but the writing is still very beautiful. Certain it is that he was a great favorite among all the good wives of the village, who took in took his part in all family squabbles and never failed, whenever they talked those matters over in their evening gossipings, to lay all the blame on Dame Van Winkle. That's his wife. The children of the village, too, would shout with joy whenever he approached. He assisted at their sports, made their playthings, taught them to fly kites and shoot marbles, and told them long stories of ghosts, witches, and Indians. Whenever he went dodging about the village, he was surrounded by a troop of them, hanging on his coat skirts, clambering on his back, and playing 1,000 tricks on him with impunity. And not a dog would bark at him throughout the neighborhood. Okay, so who is this Rip Van Winkle character? What we learn about him? He seems like the type of person that everyone loves, the type of person that everyone gets along with, the type of person that everyone thinks highly of, and he seems to be a good-natured man who is patient, long-suffering, and has these really excellent characteristics about him. This is who this Rip Van Winkle person is. The great error in Rip's character was an insufferable dislike of all kinds of profitable labor. It could not be from the want of perseverance, for he would sit on a wet rock with a rod as long and heavy as Tartar's lance, and fish all day without a murmur, even though he should not be encouraged by a single nibble. He would carry a fowling piece on his shoulder for hours together, trudging through wood and swamp and up hill and down dale to shoot a few squirrels or wild pigeons. He would never refuse to assist a neighbor even in the roughest toil, and was a foremost man at all country frolies for husking Indian corn or building stone fences. The women of the village, too, used to employ him to run their errands and to do such little odd jobs as their less obliging husbands would not do for them. In a word, Rip was ready to attend to anybody's business but his own. But as to doing family duty and keeping his farm in order, he found it impossible. In fact, he declared it was of no use to work on his farm. It was the most pestilent little piece of ground in the whole country. Everything about it went wrong, and would go wrong in spite of him. His fences were continually falling to pieces. His cow would either go astray or get among the cabbages. Weeds were sure to grow quicker in his fields than anywhere else. The rain always made a point of setting in just as he had some outdoor work to do, so that his estate had dwindled away under his management, acre by acre, until there was little more left than a mere patch of Indian corn and potatoes, and was the worst conditioned farm in the neighborhood. So this Rip Van Winkle seems like an interesting character. His children, too, were as ragged and wild as if they belonged to nobody. His son Rip promised to inherit the habits with the old clothes of his father. He was generally seen trooping like a colt at his mother's heels, equipping in a pair of his father's cast-off gallicaskins. I do not know what those are. Gallicaskins, you look at the bottom of the book, they were loose, knee-length trousers. Um, which he had to hold up with one hand as a fine lady does her train in bad weather. Rip Van Winkle, however, was one of those happy mortals of foolish, well oiled dispositions, who take the world easy and eat white bread or brown, whichever can be got with the least thought or trouble, and would rather starve on a penny than work for a pound. If left to himself, he would have whistled life away in a perfect contentment, but his wife kept continually dinning in his ears about his idleness, his carelessness, and the ruin he was bringing on his family. Morning, noon, and night, her tongue was incessantly going, and everything he said or did was sure to produce a torrent of household eloquence. Rip had but one way of replying to all the lectures of the kind, and that, by frequent use, had grown into a habit. He shrugged his shoulders, shook his head, cast up his eyes, but said nothing. This, however, always provoked a fresh volley from his wife, so that he would take out the out, so that he would take to the outside of his house, the only side which in truth belonged to a hen-pecked husband. Rip's sole domestic adherent was his dog Wolf, who was as much henpecked as his master. For Dame Van Winkle regarded them as companions in idleness, and even looked upon Wolf with an evil eye as the cause of his master's going so often astray. True it is, in all points of spirit befitting an honorable dog, he was as courageous an animal as ever scoured the woods. But what courage can withstand the terrors of a woman's tongue? Though moment wo- The moment Wolf entered the house, his crest fell, his tail drooped to the ground, or curled between his legs. He sneaked about with a gallows air, casting many a sidelong glance at Dame Van Winkle, and at the least flourish of a broomstick or ladle, he would fly to the door yelping. Times grew worse and worse with Rip Van Winkle as years of matrimony rolled on, so years of his marriage. A tart temper never mellows with age, and a sharp tongue is the only edged tool that grows keener with constant use. For a long while, he used to console himself when driven from home by frequenting a kind of perpetual club of sages, philosophers, and other idle personages of the village, which held its session on a bench before a small inn, designated by a portrait of His Majesty George III. Here they used to sit in the shade, um, though a long, lazy summer's day, talking listlessly over village gossip or telling endlessly sleepy stories about nothing. But it would have been worth any stateman's money to have heard the profound discussions that sometimes took place, when by chance an old newspaper fell into their hands from some passing traveller. How solemnly they would listen to the contents, as drawled on by Derek Van Bummel, the schoolmaster, a dapper, learned little man who was not to be daunted by the most gigantic word in the dictionary, and how sagely they would deliberate upon public events even months after they had taken place. The opinions of this club were completely controlled by Nicholas Vedder, a patriarch of the village and a landlord of the inn, at the door of which he took his seat from morning till night, just moving sufficiently to avoid the sun and keep in the shade of the large tree, so that the neighbors could tell the hour by his movements as accurately as by his sundial. It is true he was rarely heard to speak, but smoked his pipe incessantly. His adherents, however, perfectly understood him and knew how to gather his opinions. When anything that was read or related displeased him, he was observed to smoke his pipe vehemently, and to send forth short, frequent, and angry puffs. But when pleased, he would inhale the smoke slowly and tranquilly, and emit it in a light and placid clouds, and sometimes, taking the pipe from his mouth, letting the fragrant vapor curl about his nose, would gravely nod his head in a token of perfect approbation. So, who are these people we're talking about? So, Rip Van Winkle is a man who um, has a difficult time getting work done. Um, he can help. He is more than willing to help anyone around the neighborhood at all times, doing anything they want. They ask him to do. He's very very friendly in that way, and people love him for that. Around his own house, he pretty much gets nothing done ever. His house slowly becomes more and more run down, and his wife is unhappy with him, and she's constantly telling him to do his work and to get him going, and she has a sharp tongue. And I like the description that they give where um, the sharp tongue is the only tool that becomes sharper as it gets used more. What we mean by sharp tongue is someone that has really can be aggressive and maybe can use unkind words constantly. Is a bit of a mean spirited person, and that's what Rip has at his wife. His wife is like that. Um, and so what Rip does is to avoid that is he spends time with these gentlemen that all hang out outside the inn, and they sit around and they just chat. Um, Sometimes chatting about nothing, but also sometimes chatting about some important big things. And now we're sort of getting a description of each one of these characters. From even this stronghold, the unlucky Rip was at length routed by his wife. He would suddenly break in upon the tranquillity of the assemblage and call the members all to naught. Nor was the august personage, Nicholas Vedder himself, sacred from the daring tongue of this terrible shrew, who charged him outright with encouraging her husbands in the habit of idleness. Oof. I'm going to pause here for now because I got some other work to do. We will keep going. Um, Maybe you can watch this first part because it's been about 15 minutes already. I will keep going on page 120.